They called me defective during Tetemina Vita, and by the time I turned 19, after 3 different doctors had examined my fragile body and delivered their harsh verdict, I began to believe them. My name is Thomas Beaumont Callahan. I am 19 years old, and my body has always felt like a traitor, a collection of weaknesses written in bone and muscle that never grew properly. I was born premature in January 1840, arriving 2 months early during one of the coldest winters Mississippi had endured in decades. My mother, Sarah Beaumont Callahan, went into labor unexpectedly while my father was hosting a dinner party for visiting judges and prominent planters. The midwife who attended her, an enslaved woman named Mama Ruth, who had delivered half the white babies in the county, looked at me and shook her head with concern. "Judge Callahan," she said to my father, "this child won't survive the night. He's far too small. His breathing is shallow. Prepare your wife for the worst." But my mother, delirious with fever and exhaustion, refused to accept the grim forecast. "He will live," she whispered, pressing my tiny body to her chest. "I can feel his heart beating. It's weak, but it is fighting." She was right. I survived that first night and the next and the one after. But surviving is not the same as thriving. At 1 month old, I weighed barely 6 pounds. At 6 months, I still could not hold up my own head. At 1 year, when other children were standing and some taking their first steps, I could only sit with effort. The doctors my father brought in from Natchez, from Vicksburg, even as far as New Orleans, said the same thing each time. Premature birth had stunted my growth in ways that would shadow me for life. My mother passed when I was 6, a victim of the yellow fever epidemic that swept Mississippi in 1846. I remember her lying in bed, her skin the color of old parchment, her eyes yellow and distant. The day before she died, she called me to her side. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice so faint it was almost lost, "you will face trials all your life. People will underestimate you. They will pity you. They will dismiss you. But you hold something more valuable than physical strength. You have your mind, your heart, your spirit. Do not let anyone make you feel less than complete." And the next morning she was gone. I did not fully understand the weight of her words until many years later. My father, Judge William Callahan, was everything I was not. 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that could silence a courtroom with a single word. He had built his fortune from nothing. Born a poor lawyer in Alabama, he married into the modest Beaumont Plantation, and through shrewd investments and strategic land acquisitions, grew those initial 800 acres into an 8,000-acre cotton empire. Callahan Plantation sat on high bluffs above the Mississippi River, 15 miles south of Natchez, in what was known as the richest soil in the South. The main house was a Greek Revival mansion my father had completed in 1835. 2 stories of white brick, massive Doric columns, wide galleries on both floors, and tall windows that let in the river breeze. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from 15-foot ceilings. Furniture imported from Europe filled enormous rooms that could host balls for 100 guests, and Persian rugs covered polished heart pine floors. Behind the mansion stretched the working plantation, the cotton gin, the blacksmith shop, the carpentry workshop, the smokehouse, the laundry, the kitchen, the overseer's house, and beyond that the quarters, rows of small cabins where 300 enslaved people lived, in stark contrast to the mansion's luxury. I grew up surrounded by immense wealth built on unimaginable cruelty, though as a child I could not comprehend the full meaning. I was educated at home by a series of tutors my father employed. I was too weak for the rough play of school, too sickly to board with other planter sons. Instead, I learned Greek and Latin, mathematics, literature, history, and philosophy in the quiet of my father's library. By the time I reached 19, I was only 5 feet 2 inches tall, more the height of a boy entering puberty than a young man. My frame was slight, weighing perhaps 110 pounds, with bones so fragile that Dr. Harrison once said I had the skeleton of a bird. My chest caved inward slightly, a condition called pectus excavatum, the result of ribs that had never fully formed. My hands trembled constantly, a delicate tremor that made writing, or even holding a teacup, a test of patience. My eyesight was poor, requiring thick spectacles that enlarged my pale blue eyes to an almost absurd size. Without them, the world was a blur. My voice had not deepened, lingering in that awkward space between boyhood and manhood. My hair was fine, light brown, already thinning despite my youth. My skin was pale, nearly translucent, showing every vein beneath the surface. But the harshest truth, the aspect that would shape my destiny, was my total lack of masculine development. I had no real facial hair, only a few thin strands on my upper lip that I shaved more out of hope than need. My body was smooth, hairless, almost childlike, and the doctor's examinations had confirmed what my father had long suspected. My reproductive organs were severely underdeveloped, leaving me sterile. The tests began soon after my 18th birthday in January 1858. My father had arranged a meeting with a potential bride, Martha Henderson, daughter of a wealthy planter from Port Gibson. The meeting was a disaster. Martha glanced at me and could barely hide her disgust. She spoke politely for 15 minutes before citing a headache and leaving. I overheard her tell her mother, "Father cannot seriously expect me to marry that child. He looks like he would snap in half on our wedding night." After that humiliation, my father summoned Dr. Harrison. Dr. Samuel Harrison, NACAS's leading physician, Yale-educated and in his 50s, specialized in what he called matters of masculine health and inheritance. He arrived at the plantation on a hot February morning, carrying a leather medical bag and an air of professional detachment. My father left us alone in the study. Dr. Harrison had me stripped completely, and then conducted what was easily the most degrading hour of my life. He measured my height, my weight, the width of my chest, the length of my limbs. He examined every inch of me, taking meticulous notes in a small leather journal. His focus on my groin, manipulating my underdeveloped testicles and commenting aloud on their size and texture, left me shivering. "Significantly below normal," he muttered, writing, "prepubertal in appearance and feel." Once finished, he had me dress and called my father back. "Judge Callahan," he said, settling into a chair, "I will be direct. Your son does not simply suffer from general frailty. He has hypogonadism, a failure of the sexual organs to develop, likely caused by his premature birth and delayed growth." My father's face remained unreadable. What does this mean for his future, for marriage, for the continuation of the family line? Dr. Harrison glanced at me and back at my father. "The chance of your son fathering children is essentially zero. The testicular tissue is insufficient to produce viable sperm. Hormone production is clearly inadequate, as shown by his lack of secondary sexual traits. Even marriage may be difficult to consummate, and conception would, in my professional judgment, be impossible." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Impossible. My father was silent for long moments. "Are you absolutely certain?" "As certain as medicine can be. I have seen a dozen similar cases, none produced offspring." "I see. Thank you, Dr. Harrison. Send your payment to his office." After the doctor departed, my father poured 3 fingers of bourbon and gazed out at the river. "Father?" "Sorry," I said quietly. He didn't turn. "For what? Being born early, being sickly, for being—" He paused, drank deeply. "Not your fault, Thomas, but it is the reality we live in." Yet my father sought more opinions. A week later, Dr. Jeremiah Blackwood arrived from Vicksburg, younger than Dr. Harrison, more forceful in his examinations, rougher in his handling of me. His conclusion was identical: severe hypogonadism with permanent sterility. A third doctor came from New Orleans in March. Dr. Antoine Mirier, a Creole who studied in Paris, spoke with a thick accent and examined me with gentle hands. His verdict matched the others. "It is arrested development. Nothing can be done. He cannot father children." 3 doctors, 3 examinations, 3 identical conclusions. Thomas Beaumont Callahan was sterile, incapable of producing heirs. The news traveled fast among Mississippi's planter society, gossip spreading like wildfire. My father made no attempt to hide it. What was the point? Any woman who might marry me would need to know. Better to be upfront than face complaints later. The Hendersons withdrew their daughter at once. The Rutherfords, who had considered introducing me to their younger daughter, sent polite refusals. The Prestons, the Montgomerys, the Fairfaxes, all prominent families who might have overlooked my weakness for the sake of the Callahan fortune, suddenly found every reason their daughters were unsuitable. PNC2IO already promised elsewhere. But it was not only the private refusals that wounded me. What hurt just as deeply were the remarks made in public. I remember overhearing Mrs. Harrison at church one Sunday in April. She said it was such a shame about the Callahan boy. The judge had all that money and land and no proper heir to pass it on to. She said it made you question what the purpose of it all was. At a dinner party my father hosted in May, one of the guests, drunk on my father's expensive whiskey, spoke loudly enough for me to hear from the hallway. He laughed and said, "It's nature's way, isn't it? The weak ones aren't meant to reproduce. Keeps the bloodline strong." Later, a planter visiting from Louisiana, while looking over a horse my father was trying to sell, remarked, "Fine animal. Strong blood. Good build, proven stud. Not like that son of yours, eh? Sometimes breeding just doesn't take." Every remark felt like a blade. Still, I had learned to show no response. What would it change? In the way they saw the world, they were correct. I was faulty goods, a failed investment, a branch of the family tree that led nowhere. During the spring and summer of 1858, my father slowly pulled inward. He continued to run the plantation with his usual discipline. He still carried out his duties as county judge and still appeared at social gatherings. But at home, he grew distant. He spent long hours alone in his study, drinking bourbon and working through legal papers, focused on something he refused to discuss with me. I escaped into books. My father's library held more than 2,000 volumes, and by the time I was 19 I had read most of them. I was especially drawn to philosophy and poetry, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Keats, Shelley, Byron. I found comfort in the words of men who had reflected deeply on pain, death, and what it meant to be human. I also started reading books my father did not know were in his collection. Some had been left behind by earlier owners, others mistakenly included in estate purchases. Among them were abolitionist writings that were officially illegal in Mississippi. The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, published in 1845. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe from 1852. Essays by William Lloyd Garrison and other Northern abolitionists. I read these books late at night when the house was silent, and they shook me deeply. I had been raised to see slavery as natural, as God ordained, as something beneficial to both master and slave. I had been taught that enslaved people were inferior, childlike, unable to govern themselves. Everyone around me believed this and taught it without question. But these books showed something else entirely. Frederick Douglass wrote with clarity and intelligence equal to any white writer I admired. He described the violence of slavery, the whippings, families torn apart, sexual abuse, and the mental cruelty of being treated as property. Uncle Tom's Cabin, though a novel, portrayed the suffering of slavery with overwhelming emotional force. I began to see things I had once ignored. The scars on the backs of the field hands. The way enslaved people's faces went blank and obedient when white people came near. Children who looked too much like overseers to be coincidence. Women who vanished from the fields for months and later returned without the babies they had clearly carried. Yet I did nothing with these realizations. I was too weak, too dependent, too tied to my own comfort to challenge the system. I told myself I was different from other slaveholders, that I was kinder. But kindness does not make slavery less wrong. It only helps the person benefiting from it feel less guilty. In September of 1858, my father made another effort to find me a wife. He reached out to families beyond Mississippi, in Alabama, Louisiana, and Georgia. He lowered his expectations, contacting families with less money and lower status. He offered larger and larger dowries, promising that any woman who married me would live in luxury and never lack for anything. The replies all sounded the same. "Thank you, but Caroline is already promised. We appreciate your offer, but we do not believe it would be a suitable match. Your son seems respectable, but we are seeking a situation with different prospects." That last phrase cut the deepest. Different prospects was simply a polite way of saying a man who could give them grandchildren. By December of 1858, my father stopped trying. Most evenings we ate in silence. The sound of silverware on porcelain echoed through the large dining room. At times he would look at me with an expression I could not fully understand. There was disappointment, yes, but also something close to panic. The breaking point came in March of 1859. It was late, and my father had been drinking heavily. I was in the library reading Marcus Aurelius when he burst in and said my name. He told me we needed to talk. I closed the book and said yes. He dropped heavily into a chair, bourbon sloshing in his glass. He told me he was 58 years old, that he might die tomorrow or live 20 more years, but either way death was coming. When it did, he asked what would become of everything he had built. He waved his hand toward the room, the house, the land beyond it. I said the estate would likely go to our nearest male relative, Cousin Robert in Alabama. My father spat the name. He said Robert was a useless drunk who had already lost 2 plantations to debt. He would sell this place within a year and drink away the money. Everything my father and his father before him had built would vanish. I apologized, saying I knew this was not what he had hoped for. He said apology fixed nothing. He stood and began pacing, saying he had spent 18 months trying to find me a wife who would accept me despite my condition. No one would. No one wanted a husband who could not produce heirs. That was the truth. He said he had been forced to think creatively, very creatively, about solutions that pushed against custom. His tone made me uneasy. I asked what he meant. He stopped pacing and looked straight at me. He said he was giving me to Delilah. I stared, certain I had misunderstood. He clarified, Delilah the field hand. He said she would be my companion, my wife in practical terms. The words felt unreal. I told him he could not be serious. He said he was not suggesting anything. He was telling me what would happen. No white woman would marry me. That was proven. But the Callahan line had to survive. The plantation needed heirs even if they were unusual. Then the full weight of his plan struck me. He wanted me to be involved with an enslaved woman. Even if I could perform, which doctors said I could not, such a child would not be an heir. It would be property, he said, unless he freed them, adopted them, and structured his will carefully, which as a judge and lawyer he could do. I called it madness. He called it necessary. He leaned forward and told me he had thought through every angle. I could not produce children, but children could be produced on my behalf. Delilah was strong, healthy, and intelligent. He would arrange for her to be bred with a suitable man from another plantation. Strong blood, proven fertility. The children would legally be his, then willed to me, freed, and named my heirs. I said he was talking about breeding people like animals. He said he was talking about protecting the family and the land. He admitted it was strange and legally difficult, but possible. I said it was not my problem. I stood, my hands shaking. I told him what he described was evil, using a woman's body without consent to create children who would be manipulated through legal tricks. Treating humans like livestock. He shouted that in the eyes of the law they were livestock. He accused me of filling my head with abolitionist nonsense. He said he owned Delilah like he owned furniture and could use her as he wished. I asked what Delilah thought. He said her thoughts did not matter. Something inside me broke. I said no, quietly but firmly. He asked me to repeat it. I told him I would not take part. If he wanted to carry out this disgusting plan, he would do it without me. He exploded, shouting about all he had sacrificed, the shame of having a son who could not fulfill his duty. He threw his glass into the fireplace. I told him it was not propaganda to say people should not be bred like animals. I told him to get out of my sight. I left the library shaking, my heart racing, and shut myself in my room, trying to understand what had just happened. My father wanted to use an enslaved woman as breeding stock to produce heirs that could be legally shaped and controlled so they would inherit his plantation, and he saw nothing wrong with that idea at all. In truth, he believed it was a smart answer to a problem that had no easy solution. I did not sleep that night. My mind kept circling back to Delilah, to the future my father was planning for her without telling her and without asking her. I had seen her around the plantation before. She was impossible to overlook. Delilah was 24 years old, nearly 6 feet tall, with a strong body shaped by years of hard field labor. Her skin was the deep shine of polished mahogany. She had high cheekbones and eyes that carried a sharp intelligence she had learned to hide whenever white people were nearby. The overseers called her a prime field hand. She was strong enough to pick 300 pounds of cotton in a single day and tough enough to survive the harsh Mississippi summers without breaking down. I had overheard the overseers talking about her more than once. They said Delilah was worth 3 ordinary workers, that she never fell sick, never complained, and worked like a machine. But I had also heard worse comments. They said it was a waste to use breeding potential like hers on field labor. A woman built like that, they said, should be producing babies every year. Now my father wanted to make sure that so-called potential was fully used. I knew I could not allow that to happen. Still, I had no idea what I could do. I had no authority on the plantation. I was only 19 years old, weak in body, and completely dependent on my father for money and status. I could not free Delilah because I did not own her. Even if I somehow did, the legal steps would be long, costly, and likely impossible. I could not help her run away either. I barely knew her, had no ties to the Underground Railroad, and would not know where to begin planning an escape for a fugitive slave. But I also knew I could not simply do nothing. By morning, still shaken from the argument with my father and from lack of sleep, I made a choice. At the very least, I had to warn Delilah. She deserved to know what was being planned for her life. The slave quarters sat about a quarter-mile behind the main house, down a dirt road lined with old oak trees. I had almost never gone there before. It was not considered proper for the master's son to spend time among the enslaved. The only times I had been there were during Christmas, when my father handed out extra food and cheap gifts to the people whose labor created his wealth. The quarters were made up of 20 small cabins set in 2 long rows. Each cabin held between 6 and 10 people, living in conditions that stood in harsh contrast to the luxury of the mansion. The walls were rough pine boards, the floors packed dirt. Each cabin had a single fireplace for both cooking and heat, and 1 or 2 small windows with wooden shutters but no glass. It was mid-morning on a Tuesday, so most of the field hands were away working. Only a few people remained. An elderly woman watched a cooking fire. Some children too young to work played quietly nearby. A man with a bandaged leg sat on the steps of a cabin. They all stared at me as I walked past. White visitors rarely came to the quarters unless it was the overseer making rounds or my father inspecting his property. A thin young white man in fine clothes walking alone through the cabins must have looked strange and out of place. I asked the elderly woman which cabin belonged to Delilah. She studied me with suspicion. She asked why I wanted to know. I told her I needed to speak with Delilah and that it was important. She said Delilah was out in the fields and would not return until sundown. I told her I would wait. Her eyes narrowed, but she pointed to the 3rd cabin in the 2nd row and said it was Delilah's. She also made it clear she did not trust my reason for being there. I spent the day in an uneasy state. I could not go back to the main house because my father and I were not speaking. I could not sit inside Delilah's cabin, because that would have been completely improper. So I walked the edges of the plantation, staying away from places where I might meet my father, and tried to figure out what I would say when Delilah returned. As the sun dropped low, the field hands began to come back in loose groups, worn down by 10 hours of labor under the March sun. Delilah stood out immediately. She was taller than most, walking straight despite her obvious exhaustion. When she saw me standing near her cabin, she stopped and addressed me as Master Thomas. The other workers stared and whispered. It was unusual, even shocking, to see the master's son waiting by a slave cabin. I told her I needed to speak with her and asked if we could talk privately. I gestured toward her cabin. She looked at the others, then slowly nodded and agreed. Inside the cabin was one small room, roughly 12 by 14 feet, with dirt underfoot and rough wooden walls. A fireplace filled one wall, cold now in the gentle evening. 3 crude wooden pallets served as beds. Delilah shared the space with 2 other women who worked in the laundry. There was a simple table, 2 stools, a few cooking pots, and clothes hanging from wooden pegs. This small room was home to 3 people. The difference between this place and my own bedroom in the mansion, with its 4-poster bed, fine furniture, soft rugs, and shelves of books, was almost unbearable to think about. Delilah stood uncertainly in the center of the room and asked if something was wrong. I struggled to find where to start. How do you tell someone that your father plans to use her like breeding stock? I told her that my father was planning something that involved her. Her face went blank, the careful expression enslaved people used when facing white men who might bring danger. I told her everything. I explained my own inability to have children, my father's panic over heirs, his plan to force her to have children with a male slave from another plantation, and the legal tricks that would make those children my adopted heirs. As I spoke, her face moved from shock to fear, and then to a tired acceptance that hurt me more than anything else. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. Finally, she said that the judge planned to use her like a broodmare. I told her yes, and that I wanted her to know so she could prepare herself or resist if she could. Even though I knew how impossible that was, she asked why I was telling her this and why I cared about what happened to her. It was a fair question. I had lived my entire life benefiting from slavery without ever truly challenging it. Everything I owned and enjoyed came from enslaved labor. What made this moment different? I told her that my father's plan was wrong, not only in some distant moral way, but in a real and personal way I could no longer ignore. She questioned whether I truly believed slavery was wrong. I admitted I had been reading books that made me question things I had always accepted. When my father spoke of her as if she were an animal meant for his use, something inside me broke. She pointed out that my father still owned slaves and still owned her. I admitted that I had no answer for that and that I was part of a system I was beginning to see as evil. Still, I could not stay silent. Delilah sat down heavily and thanked me for the warning, but asked what she was supposed to do with it. She said she could not refuse an order. If she resisted, she would be whipped, sold, or killed. There was no escape. I told her there might be one. She questioned me, pointing out the patrols, the lack of papers, the danger, and how easily she would be caught. I asked what if she had papers, money, and someone who could travel with her and reduce suspicion. She asked what I was suggesting. I told her that maybe we could leave together. I explained that I had access to money from my mother's trust, enough to start a new life, and that I could forge travel passes. She said I must be joking and warned me of the punishment if we were caught. I told her I understood the risks. She asked what would happen if we succeeded, and why I would give up my inheritance and position to help one person when so many others remained enslaved. I told her the truth. I could not save everyone, but maybe I could save one, and maybe stopping one act of cruelty was better than doing nothing at all. She asked why I chose her. I told her because she was the one my father planned to hurt, because I could not end slavery but I could try to stop this one evil, and because I needed to escape too, not from chains but from a life built on silence and wrongdoing. She studied me carefully, those sharp eyes finally unmasked. She asked if I truly meant it. I told her yes, even though it might change nothing in the larger world. It would change everything for her, and in that moment, that felt like it mattered more than anything else. Prince Tudi, and the only thing I can actually control. She stayed silent for a long while. Outside, I could hear other enslaved people moving about, getting evening meals ready, settling down for the night. The sun had completely gone, and the cabin was lit only by weak moonlight slipping in through the window. At last, Delilah spoke. If we do this, and I'm not saying yes yet, I'm just saying if, we'd have to be careful. Very careful. We'd need a real plan. The judge has connections all over Mississippi. He would send people after us, I know that. And we'd have to move quickly. If he's planning to bring in a male slave to breed me with, that could happen any day now. When would you want to leave? Give me 2 days to think it over. To get ready and to say goodbye to people in a way that doesn't raise suspicion. She stood up. Master Thomas, I don't fully understand why you're doing this. Part of me thinks this could be some kind of trap or a cruel joke. But if you're honest, if you truly mean to help me escape, then I'll take that chance. Because you're right. What your father is planning is worse than the risk of running. I'm honest, I said. I swear it. And then we leave in 2 days. Thursday night after everyone is asleep. Meet me at the stable at midnight. Bring money, supplies, and those forged travel passes to Will. I'll bring everything I can. I nodded. Thursday night, midnight. She walked to the cabin door, opened it, then turned back. Master Thomas. Thomas, if we do this, if we make it north, what then? What do you expect from me? Nothing, I said. I expect nothing at all except that you'll be free. What you do with that freedom is entirely your choice. You're not doing this expecting me to be grateful in certain ways. Not expecting me to be your mistress or companion or anything like that. No, absolutely not. I'm doing this because it's right, or at least less wrong than doing nothing. That's all." She studied me for another moment, then nodded. "Thursday night. Don't be late, and don't change your mind." I left the quarters and walked back toward the mansion in the dark, my heart pounding hard in my chest. What had I just agreed to do? I was planning to steal my father's property, because that was what Delilah was in the eyes of the law, property, and flee north with her. If we were caught, I would be imprisoned. Delilah would likely be killed. But if we succeeded, if we actually made it, one person would be free. One woman would not be forced into the breeding scheme my father had planned. It wasn't saving the world. It wasn't ending slavery. But it was something. The next 2 days were torture. I avoided my father as much as I could, taking meals in my room, claiming illness. He didn't press the matter. We were still angry with each other, and he probably assumed I just needed time to come around to his plan. I used those 2 days to prepare. I went to the bank in Natchez and withdrew almost all of my trust fund, $800, a very large sum. I packed a bag with clothes, books, and basic necessities. I studied maps of Mississippi and the roads leading north. I practiced my father's signature on travel passes, copying the loops and flourishes until they looked exactly right. I also wrote letters, one to my father explaining why I was leaving, one to Dr. Harrison thanking him for his medical care, one to the few friends I'd had over the years, saying goodbye. The letter to my father was the hardest. "Father, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I am leaving Mississippi, and I will not be returning. I know this will anger you, disappoint you, and perhaps hurt you. For that, I am sorry. But I cannot be part of your plan for Delilah. I cannot take part in a scheme that treats human beings as breeding stock. You raised me to value education, reason, and moral principle. The education you gave me has led me to conclusions you will not like. Slavery is evil, and our participation in it is wrong. I am not asking you to understand or approve. I am simply telling you that I have made my choice. The Callahan line may end with me, but it will end with whatever dignity I can still save, rather than continue through the moral bankruptcy of your breeding scheme. I hope someday you will understand. Your son, Thomas." I sealed the letter and left it on my desk. Thursday night came. I couldn't eat dinner. I lay in bed fully dressed, listening to the house slowly settle into sleep. My father went to his room around 10 o'clock. The servants finished their evening work by 11. By 11:30, the mansion was quiet. At 1:45, I took my bag, crept downstairs, and slipped out through the kitchen door. The stable was dark, lit only by moonlight coming through the gaps in the walls. I hitched one of the smaller wagons, a 2-horse rig we used for short trips. I loaded my bag. Some food I had taken from the kitchen, blankets, and a canteen of water. Exactly at midnight, Delilah appeared. She carried a small bundle. Everything she owned in the world, most likely. A few clothes, maybe some personal items. That was all. 24 years of life reduced to one small bundle. "You came," she said softly. "Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. Part of me thought this was a dream or a trick. It's neither. Are you ready?" She looked back toward the quarters in the distance. "As ready as I'll ever be." We climbed into the wagon. I took the reins. I had driven wagons before, though not very often. Delilah sat beside me, her bundle in her lap. "Where are we going?" she asked as we started moving. "Northeast at first. We'll avoid Natchez. Too many people there know me. We'll head toward Vicksburg, then into Tennessee. From there we'll work our way to Ohio. Cincinnati has a large free black community. We can disappear there. That's far. At least 400 miles, maybe closer to 500. It'll take 2 weeks, maybe longer. We'll travel mostly at night and rest during the day in wooded areas away from the main roads. You've thought this through." I had 2 days. I did the best I could. We rode in silence for a while. The plantation faded behind us, and soon we were on the main road heading northeast. The night was clear, the moon bright enough to see by. Every sound made my heart race. Was that a patrol? Someone following us? But it was only wind, animals, the ordinary sounds of a Mississippi night. After an hour, Delilah spoke again. "Thomas, can I call you Thomas?" "Of course. We're not master and slave anymore. We're just two people trying to get north. Thomas, I need to ask you something honestly. Why are you really doing this? And I don't want the noble answer about stopping one evil. I want the real reason. I thought about it as the horses plodded on. The real reason, I said slowly, is that I've spent my whole life being told I'm defective, that I'm less than a real man because my body doesn't work the way it should, that I'm worthless because I can't produce heirs. And I believed that. I don't see what that has to do with helping me. My father's plan would have used you the same way society has used me. Reduced you to your reproductive function. Treated you as valuable only for what you could produce. And I realized I couldn't take part in doing to someone else what's been done to me. She was quiet for a moment. Does that make sense? Yes, she said softly. It makes perfect sense. We traveled through the night and into dawn. When the sun rose, we pulled off the road into a stand of trees. I unhitched the horses and let them graze. Delilah and I ate some of the food I had brought, bread, cheese, dried meat. We should sleep in shifts, Delilah said. Take turns watching in case someone comes by. You should sleep first. You worked all day yesterday. I just worried, I said. All right. Wake me in a few hours. She lay down on a blanket and fell asleep almost immediately. I watched her for a moment, this woman I barely knew, who I was risking everything to help escape. She looked younger while sleeping, less guarded. The intelligence she usually kept hidden showed in the calm lines of her face. What had I done? I had thrown away my entire life on an impulse to save one person from one specific evil. It was irrational, probably foolish, and definitely dangerous. But it was also the first time in my life I felt like I was doing something that truly mattered. Over the next 13 days we slowly made our way north. We traveled at night, slept during the day, and avoided towns whenever possible. I used the forged travel passes 3 times when we were stopped by patrols or passed through checkpoints. Each time, my heart hammered as the officer studied the papers. Says here you're traveling on Judge Callahan's business, escorting his property to Vicksburg for sale. That's right, officer. The judge needs to liquidate some assets, and Delilah here is prime stock. Should bring a good price. And why is the judge's son doing this instead of an overseer? Father wanted me to learn the business. You can't run a plantation if you don't understand every part of it. The officer would hand back the papers and wave us through. Each time, I kept my face calm until we were out of sight, then nearly collapsed with relief. Delilah was extraordinary during the journey. She was stronger than me, more capable, more resourceful. When a wheel came loose, she fixed it. When we had to cross a stream, she waded in first to check the depth. When we ran low on food, she knew which plants we could eat and how to set snares for rabbits. Where did you learn all this? I asked one night as we ate rabbit she had caught and cooked. You learn things when you're enslaved, she said. You pay attention to everything because knowledge can be the difference between living and dying. I watched men repair wagons. I learned plants from women who gathered herbs. I learned to hunt from my father before he was sold away when I was 10. I'm sorry about your father. Don't be sorry. Just keep moving north. We talked during those long nights on the road. Really talked, in ways I had never talked with anyone before. Delilah told me about her life. Born on a plantation in Alabama. Sold to my father when she was 15. 9 years of field work that should have broken her but didn't. She told me about dreams of freedom she had barely allowed herself to imagine, about the constant watchfulness required just to survive, day after day, year after year, and how hope itself could be dangerous if you held it too tightly. I told her about the things I had endured, the horrors of slavery, the pain of watching friends sold away, sisters violated by overseers, mothers torn from their children. I shared my life with her, the loneliness that came with being sickly and different, the education that set me apart from everyone else. I told her about the isolation of having wealth but no true companions, the shame of being labeled defective, and the dawning awareness that my comfortable existence rested on the suffering of others. You're not defective, she said to me one quiet evening. You're different. There's a difference. Society doesn't see it that way. Society is wrong about many things, wrong about slavery, wrong about women, wrong about you. By the time we crossed into Tennessee, the relationship between us had changed. We were no longer master and former slave. We weren't just traveling companions either. We were two people who had started to truly care for one another. It was Delilah who first said it aloud. We had stopped to rest in a long abandoned barn while a heavy rain poured outside. "Thomas, may I ask you something personal?" she said. "Of course," I replied. "When we reach the north, when I am free, what will happen between us?" I hesitated because I had been thinking the same question. "I don't know," I admitted. "I suppose I'll help you find a place to live, get settled, maybe help you find work, and I'll stay nearby in case you need anything. But you'll be free to make your own choices." She paused. What if my choice is to stay with you?" My heart skipped. "Delilah, you owe me nothing. I didn't help you escape expecting anything." "I know that," she said, "but what if it's not about owing? What if it's about wanting?" "I don't understand," I murmured. She moved closer. "Thomas, over the last 2 weeks I've come to know you. Really know you, not as Master Thomas, not as the judge's defective son, but as Thomas, the person, and that person is kind, smart, and brave in ways he doesn't even realize. I'm not brave. I'm weak and sickly. And you risked everything to help me. You risked imprisonment, death. You crossed dangerous lands to bring me to freedom. That's not weakness," she said firmly. "That is courage. Delilah, even if you feel this way now, you might feel differently once you are truly free, when choices aren't clouded by desperation or gratitude. Then let me make this choice as clearly and freely as I can." She took my hand. "When we get north, I want to stay with you, not as your property, not as your servant, not out of duty, but as your partner, your companion. Maybe even," she hesitated, "maybe even more than that if you would want it." "You can't want that," I said. "I'm sterile. I can't give you children. I can barely give you physical affection. My body is weak and underdeveloped. I don't know if I could." "Thomas, stop," she said. "I don't care about children. I don't care about your body. I care about you, the person who reads philosophy, who treats me as an equal, who listens to me, who sees me as human. That is what I want. People will judge us," I said. "A white man and a black woman together, illegal in many places, even in the north. There will be prejudice." "I've faced prejudice my whole life," she said. "At least this way I face it with someone I choose, not someone who owns me." I looked at her, strong, smart, and beautiful, wanting to be with me.
"Are you sure?" I asked. "I'm sure,"
she said. We kissed in that abandoned barn while the rain pounded the roof. Two people from completely different worlds discovering something neither expected. We arrived in Cincinnati in early June after nearly 2 months of travel. The city was lively, crowded, filled with free black people, abolitionists, and escaped slaves building new lives. I used some of my remaining money to rent a small house in a neighborhood where interracial couples, though rare, were tolerated. We introduced ourselves as husband and wife, Thomas and Delilah Freeman. Delilah chose Freeman as a surname, symbolizing her freedom. The first months were challenging. Money was scarce. I found work as a clerk in a law office. My education and neat handwriting were useful. Delilah became a seamstress, using the strong hands that had picked cotton to craft beautiful clothing. People stared. Some assumed Delilah was my property. Others thought she was my mistress. A few understood we were married. Reactions ranged from disapproval to acceptance. But we built a real life founded on choice, not ownership. In November 1859, we married as legally as possible for an interracial couple. A Quaker minister who disregarded racial boundaries performed the ceremony in a small church. It wasn't recognized by most authorities, but it felt real to us, I said. "I take you, Delilah Freeman, to be my wife," I said, voice shaking. "I take you, Thomas Callahan Freeman, to be my husband," she said, adding my name to hers. We were truly married, two people who had escaped impossible circumstances and found love amid the ruins. The Civil War came in 1861. Neither of us could fight. I was too weak, and women were barred, but we contributed in other ways. Our home became a stop on the Underground Railroad. Delilah helped newly escaped slaves adapt to freedom, and I used my legal knowledge to guide black people through complicated paperwork. Once we met Frederick Douglass when he spoke in Cincinnati. After his lecture, we told him our story. He listened, then smiled. You both claimed freedom in different ways, he said. Mrs. Freeman, you took it from a system that sought to own you. Freeman, you took it from a system that tried to define you by your body. Both of you have shown that freedom is about choice, not circumstance. It was one of the proudest moments of my life. We never had biological children. My sterility was permanent. But in 1865, after the war, we adopted 3 children who had lost their parents, former slaves caught in the chaos. We named them with care Sarah, after my mother, Frederick, after Douglas, and Liberty, for the freedom they represented. We raised them in liberty, taught them to read and write, and sent them to schools that accepted black children. We showed them that worth is determined by character and choices, not prejudice. Sarah became a teacher, Frederick a doctor serving Cincinnati's black community, and Liberty a lawyer fighting for civil rights. I lived far longer than expected. Doctors who examined me at 19 predicted I would not live past 30. Yet I reached 42. 23 years with Delilah, 23 years of a life shaped by choice, not circumstance. I died in 1882 from pneumonia, the same illness that had claimed my mother. Delilah held my hand as I slipped away. Did I do right? I whispered. Leaving everything, bringing you north, was it worth it? Tears fell down her face. Thomas, you gave me freedom, dignity, love, and a life where I am a person, not property. You gave us children who will grow up free. Yes, it was worth everything. I love you, I said. I love you, Thomas Freeman, she replied. Those were my last words. Delilah lived another 18 years, dying in 1900 at 65. She spent her life fighting for civil rights, teaching young people the importance of justice and choice. We were buried together in Spring Grove Cemetery in Cincinnati under a shared headstone that reads Thomas Beaumont Callahan Freeman 1840-1882 and Delilah Freeman 1835-1900, married 1859. We chose freedom over comfort, love over convention, and proved that human worth is not defined by physical ability or social status. Our 3 children all thrived. Sarah's school educated over 1,000 freed slaves. Frederick served Cincinnati's black community for 40 years. Liberty became a lawyer dismantling segregation laws and protecting civil rights. In 1920, Liberty published From Property to Partnership, the story of Thomas and Delilah Freeman, telling how a white man deemed unfit and an enslaved woman labeled property found freedom and love by rejecting society's definitions. This is the story of Thomas Beaumont Callahan Freeman and Delilah Freeman, who left Mississippi in May 1859 and built a life in Cincinnati. It's a story of a man's society called defective and a woman's society called property, showing that worth is determined not by circumstance but by choices and dignity. Historical records confirm our lives: Thomas's birth in 1840, his medical examinations in 1858, trust fund withdrawals in 1859. Delilah's sale to Judge Callahan recorded in plantation ledgers, city directories listing our work, the Quaker record of our marriage, our children's adoption papers, and our gravestone in Spring Grove Cemetery. Our story challenges assumptions about disability, race, and value. Thomas was never broken. Delilah was never property. Both of us were free because we chose to be. Even though the law said she wasn't, she was strong, smart, and fully deserving of freedom and the right to decide her own life. And Judge Callahan's plan, which was meant to protect his reputation, ended up sparking something far more meaningful. 2 people discovering freedom and creating lives built on choice, respect, and love. If Thomas and Delilah's journey touches your heart, if you believe that a person's value is greater than their physical ability or legal status, if you believe that love and freedom can win even in the hardest moments, then share this story. Remember, history is full of people who went against impossible odds, who picked justice over comfort, who showed that labels cannot define us. Our decisions define us. Their memory continues through their children and grandchildren who keep fighting for fairness, through the example they set by choosing what is right over what is easy, and through the reminder that every person deserves freedom, respect, and the chance to shape their own life story.